Sometimes the universe has this unique way of putting us through something where we're meant to learn something. The real secret to success is growth, and the second secret is contribution. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not what we do with the money, it's really what we do with the money to make the world a better place. If you start modeling what they're doing, that's going to produce a result. And if the result's good, you keep going. And if the result isn't good, you retool. But ultimately, you've got to have the vision, you've got to hold the dream, and you've got to believe that if they can do it, you can do it too.
Welcome to another podcast with my friend Trevor McGregor. Trevor, I appreciate you being here. I first want to ask, because you've told your story about losing everything and rebuilding it through real estate, but here's what I want to know. When you were in that dark place, broke, marriage on the rocks, what did you actually believe about yourself at that time? Like, what was the story you were telling yourself about who you were?
Well, it's such a great question. And ultimately, we have goals and dreams and aspirations to be, do, and have certain things. And so you can get really excited and fired up about going up the mountain. But oftentimes, that climb up the mountain can feel a little bit rough, and you can find yourself tumbling back down to the land and even slip into a valley. And for me, was I was climbing up that mountain and really wanted to make something of myself. When it didn't work out, I started to have all of those doubts, those fears, those worries, and those anxieties that I think most people have when things don't go their way. But it was also an opportunity to really, ask myself different questions like, why am I feeling this way? Why do I feel like a failure? Why do I feel like I'm disappointing my spouse or my kids or my brother and sister, my parents, the people around me? And it really took me deep into what I call the valley of despair. And the valley of despair is when you wanted to climb this mountain, but you come sliding down the mountain on your butt, you go into the valley, and that's really where we have what we call the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is really, what happened to us has happened to us, but what's the meaning that we're assigning to it? And at that time, I had the meaning of doubt, fear, worry, and anxiety that really led to I've failed. I've less than I believed I could be. And I started to really, really, really spiral in that moment.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could speak to what you felt in that moment when you were spiraling. Where did you feel it in your body and how did you muster? Because a lot of people, if they spiral and they start going down, it's very difficult to get the momentum to start shifting your way in the other direction. I'm just wondering what tools you came across during that time, or just that experience that you went through.
Well, again, I got really curious and I started to think about some of the things I was reading or listening to at the time that said, you know what? The higher the high, the lower the low, and the lower the low, the higher the high. And that sometimes the universe has this unique way of putting us through something where we're meant to learn something, or we're meant to be handed, a challenge to see what we're going to do, who we're going to be, how we're going to, handle it. And, at that time, even though I didn't like being in the valley, you know what? I figured there's only one way to go from here, and that's up. And I started to read all the books. I started to listen to CDs because there weren't podcasts back then.
Yeah.
I started to go to events, and I discovered that there's a new way of thinking and behaving that if I could get up and dust myself off, I could start climbing back up the next mountain.
Understood. So at what point did the story change? Like, what was there a specific moment where you stopped seeing yourself as the guy who lost everything? And, because when you're spiraling, you have these stories in your mind that are very powerful at that time, and they're kind of reinforcing. And I'm wondering, how did you start seeing yourself as something different?
Well, it's such a great question. And again, I think that, history repeats itself. So we know that a lot of people go out there and have tremendous vision for what they want to achieve. But again, it feels like a roller coaster and they come out the other side feeling like a failure. And I was reading a book at the time, and it was called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, one of the best-selling books of all time. And there's a little quote in there that said that adversity brings with it the seed of opportunity. And I thought, geez, what does this mean? The adversity brings with it the seed of opportunity, which means that, even every dark cloud has a silver lining if you look for it. So I started to ask better questions. I started to get curious. I started to think about, what was I meant to learn? Or, is this really failure? Or is it what he calls feedback. Because if you're in business or
Mm,
you're living a life in today's fast-paced world, you're going to get a lot of feedback. And at the time, it was really an opportunity for me to ask better questions because, as I say, as a high performance coach, the better the quality of the question, the better quality the answer. And I started to shift myself from why isn't this working out to how could I make this work moving forward?
that's beautiful. I like that. So after you've done 45,000 individual coaching sessions, that's a lot. I've never met anyone who's done as many as that. After that many conversation, what's the one pattern you see over and over again in successful people who get stuck at a ceiling they just can't seem to break through?
It's such a fabulous and powerful question because we're all wanting to go to the next level, whether it's in your career, in your finances, in your health, in your relationships, whatever it is. But as we start to creep up and start to climb the ladder of success, the doubt, the fear, the anxiety kicks in. What if it doesn't work out? What if I fail? What if I lose money? What if I lose other people's money? And we literally get to that point where we start to self sabotage. And even as high performers, are really transitioning from what we call an average mindset to a high performer mindset, they can even have wobbles. They can even have this little saboteur come in. Because what ends up happening is we start to tell ourselves rational lies. And if you break that word into two, we tell ourselves rational lies why it's not going to work out, or why I'm too old, or why I'm too young, or why I'm too educated, or why I'm not educated enough. And it's really a false bill of goods because we're meant to go big. And that is when you start to really identify as a high performer, you start to read books, you hire coaches, you do things that average people aren't willing to do. That's when sparks fly and the magic starts to unfold.
Amazing. So is there a specific moment, I'm wondering, in someone's journey right before they break through where you see people start to self-sabotage even with your frameworks? I'm just curious. Or is there some like one of those hidden kind of sneaky little things that pop up? Maybe it's old conditioning, maybe it's an old belief that you typically, is there a pattern you typically see there? I'm wondering off of genuine curiosity.
Well, again, after doing 45,000 coaching sessions, and yes, that's an actual statistic, and you'll hear my voice is raspy. I mean, I've become what I call a pattern recognition specialist in order to see, what allows people that have really achieved a phenomenal, journey and phenomenal success make that jump to the next level, and what causes people who have already achieved phenomenal success to stay stuck or to plateau. And it really all comes down to what I call identity, because there's a great quote. It comes from Tony Robbins, my coach and mentor, where he said this, that the strongest force in the human personality is the need to be consistent with how we identify with ourselves. And if that's true, if we believe that this is as good as it gets, or I should be happy with what I've got, or I should just, settle and, just live a mediocre, successful life, that's not what the highest of high performers do. Because what they do is they understand that the real secret to success is growth, and the second secret is contribution. That's where you start to make it bigger than yourself. That's where you start to see that to go from good up to great, up to excellent, up to outstanding also is a recipe to give you the opportunity to shoot for extraordinary. And it's at extraordinary or extraordinary that that you're built for more. There's another level. You might be able to surround yourself with who's or super who's to help you get there. But for the committed, they will not settle. And for the committed, there's always a way.
Beautiful. I'm wondering just off that thought that you just had, because it leads right into my next question so beautifully. So when someone comes to you, because I know you work with a lot of high performers and like you just said, the higher who's, and I'm wondering, these people have made it, the people we work with for the most part, by most people's standards, they have made it. But like the income's there, the business is working, things are going good. What are they missing? What's the thing that they can't name, but they feel?
It's such a powerful question because a lot of people get to that place where they've got the career, they've got the finances, the nice house, the nice cars, and yet they still feel empty, right? And it all comes back to people are drowning in tactics They're trapped by their business. They're really, time starved. They're not fulfilled. In fact, they don't even know what they're optimizing for anymore, when what they should be focusing on is contribution.
Hmm.
Again, contribution is the one thing that we all feel that when we go out there and we make the universe better, we make our business better, we make our communities better, we make our families better by starting by making ourselves better. That's when you start to feel a different frequency and vibration. That's really what we call a pull instead of a push. For most average people, they feel pushed to move towards success. Whereas when you get up to those higher levels of success, you're pulled for more. And that is not necessarily what the money is going to do for you, but what you could do with the money. How could you go out there
Hmm.
and tithe? How could you, give to charity? How could you go on a mission trip? How could you do something that's really on your heart? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not what we do with the money. It's really what we do with the money to make the world a better place.
Yeah. This is a off the cusp just no thing that I've noticed is with I think so many business owners use willpower to get to a certain extent, and then when willpower is no longer fulfilling, they're left almost in a darker place they were before they even started. And
Yes.
you're kind of a beacon of light and showing them that, hey, there's a new way that's way more fulfilling to go about, going through business moving forward, which is to lead from the heart instead of like from willpower, which I would say is just like force, 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 force. There's this pulley mechanism, which I think is really beautiful, and I just wanted to acknowledge you in that, unless you had a thought on that to add on. But
Well, absolutely. So we often say that business is a vehicle for growth, right? And so if you're going to, go after a business as an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, a startup, even leveraging AI and really transitioning from whatever you're doing now to something, that is more futuristic, you've got to really start thinking about, what is your why? Why are you doing it in the first place? Because I find what separates average people from high performers is average people don't think about the why, and therefore they don't have the rocket fuel or the juice to sustain things when times get tough, or you come up against the opposition, or you come up against the wall, or you need to raise capital. Because the why is really, what drives us forward. And at the end of the day, the bigger the why, the bigger the ability to get up and practice what I call speed of recovery. Now, speed of recovery is a term that I'll use with my high paying clients, where when you do, have a challenge, it doesn't affect you where you sit in, silence for 2, 3, 4 days. It's almost like a great football player. Like take Tom Brady. His goal is to get the football in the end zone so he can score a touchdown. But oftentimes it doesn't work out that way. He'll end up missing the throw, or he'll get tackled, or he'll fumble the ball. Well, he's got to get back right into the huddle and call the next play. And that's where we bring up that term speed of recovery, so that you get back in the game and you throw for that next touchdown.
beautiful. I like it. So when we talk about, because one of the things you talk about a lot is the freedom code. Can you break down what that actually means? Because I've heard you talk about the five freedoms, but what's the code? What's the code part?
After doing this work as long as I have, I've really identified that there are 5 things that people really, really want to go after. And we call it the 5 freedoms framework. And the first one is financial freedom, right? Let's get that money thing handled, because money isn't a dirty word. Money is really what flows to you, and it can flow in avalanches of abundance if you add value to someone or something, right? The second thing that people are really looking for is time freedom. So, number 2 is time freedom. And once you have financial freedom, or you're moving in that direction, you can start to buy back some of your time. The third thing, which is near and dear to my heart, is location and lifestyle freedom. That is, if you could write the story to win, what would your typical week look like? Where would you be? Who would you be with? Would it be in America? Would it be in Europe? Would it be in Australia? I mean, you could go anywhere you want to really have the location and lifestyle freedom that's available to anyone that moves towards financial freedom or even more time freedom. But the final 2 are near and dear to my heart, where number 4 is impact freedom. That is, once you've got some money, some time, and the ability to go anywhere, what do you want to do with the dash between the year you were born and the year you expire? What are some of the things you would like to build, or maybe go on a mission trip, or maybe, start a charity or do something where you're not just thinking about income, you're thinking about impact, right? And then the fifth and final one is relationship freedom. And relationship freedom means that you're going to get around other people that are like minded. You're going to get around other people that are here on purpose and with purpose to make the world a better place because a high tide lifts all boats. So, as we recap, the financial freedom, the time freedom, the location and lifestyle freedom, the impact freedom, and the relationship freedom, the code part of it, and that's why we call it, the freedom code, is really the special things that I teach as a high performance coach that precede you doing that in absolute epic proportions. And the freedom code is really all about who are you being. It's really about what is your vision? What is your why? Why do you want it? How do we make it bigger than you? Who would you need to be to get it moving in the right direction? Who would you need to surround yourself with? What are the systems that support it? What's urgent? What's important? Right? And ultimately, are you measuring your progress? Because at the end of the day, anybody can really go to an airport, get into an airplane, and land in a certain destination. But if you don't know what plane you're getting on or where that pilot's taking the plane, you could land somewhere where you don't want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of something that I've heard before, which is that if you don't know the exact coordinates, X and Y coordinates of where you want to be, good luck finding a GPS that'll tell you where to go in every turn. So that's a good way
That's
to look
true.
at it. Same thing with the airport analogy. That's good.
You
So you
bet.
talk about generational wealth versus just wealth. What's the actual difference between those two? Like, why does that distinction matter for someone who's already making some good money?
Well, when it comes to wealth, wealth could mean many different things. Some people think of wealth in how much money I have, how much money I make a year, what is my net worth, right? What am I really aspiring to have, whether it's my house, my vehicles, my investments, real estate, crypto, stocks, whatever it is. But when we talk about generational wealth, it goes far beyond that because generational wealth is really somebody's ability to believe that they're here on purpose and with purpose to add value to someone or something where money becomes the byproduct of it. And you create so much of it that you literally leave a legacy for your children or your children's children or your children's children's children. And that's available to anyone who's not interested and not just committed, but defiantly committed to going out there and making it happen. And it's even, something that my wife Lisa and I really believe in helping others move towards it. What's your number? How much do you want? By when do you want it? And once we create a vision of what that looks like, we can start reverse engineering how to move you in that direction. One other thing is some people get to that place where they absolutely are all in and they really know that their legacy is going to come from generational wealth, but there's also an opportunity to move into what we call dynasty. And dynasty is really where somebody amasses a certain amount of wealth where they take a lot of that money and put it right back into, things that are near and dear to their heart. Maybe it's, infrastructure, maybe it's music, maybe it's art, maybe it's something that makes the world beautiful. So really, I want people to really understand that it's not just about money. It's about wealth, it's about generational wealth, and it's about the potential that we're all here to create a dynasty.
Understood. Yeah, the dynasty part, that was really so it's basically dynasty, just to clarify on that, is essentially something that doesn't necessarily have a an ROI attached to it, but it's more like something that is, like you said, near and dear to your heart. It's something that is more of a trying to think of
It's
a word for it.
philanthropic,
Philanthropic, yeah.
you know, perhaps it's philanthropic. Perhaps you really understand that the secret to living is giving, right? And at the end of the day, there's this great quote by Ram Dass. He says, we're all just walking each other home. We're all just walking each other home. That is, we're not on this planet very long. So what are you going to be? What are you going to do? What are you going to have that creates something so that when you're gone, people get to really enjoy something that was from the fruits of your labor?
I love that. That's a really good quote. So, what is the switching topics? What is the dark side of achievement that nobody warns you about? The thing that happens after you hit a goal that you had set out. Maybe it had been years or a lifelong goal. What is the dark side of actually achieving it?
We've all heard of that person that achieves a phenomenal level of success and they get to the top of the mountain and they celebrate it for a month or two or three. And they look around and they go, oh my God, it's really lonely up here.
Mm,
And that's when that loneliness feeling starts to creep in that if you don't create the next adventure, if you don't create the next thing, you're going to start to have doubts and fears and worries and anxieties about even being useful anymore. And that's where a lot of men and women that I coach who are successful that might sell their company for a big exit, or perhaps they, finish a medical career and are ready for the next adventure. That's when we start to take a look at, what's really on their heart. What do they really want to do, moving forward?
mm.
Why do they want to do it? What would light them up? What would be a grand adventure? And it usually comes back to if you could write the story to win, what would it look like? And if you're not sure about what that story looks like, that's when a coach or a teacher or a mentor can help you see what's possible.
Yeah. I hear a lot of stories about. I remember I mean, me personally, when I hit my goal for 4 years when I was 18 years old, it was like right when I got out of high school. I just want to make 10K in a month. I want to make 10K in a month. 4 years into it, I shot past 10K, almost hit 15K, and immediately after that, I caught COVID. And I think that
Mm.
there's a just saying I have a little bit of personal experience. Obviously, I haven't had some big, ginormous exit or anything, but it's funny how light. Why do you think that is? That sometimes life just smacks you in the face once you hit a goal. And like, is there any way to like kind of preemptively like plan for that not to happen?
I think it's a great question. And ultimately, when I was younger, my goal was to make 10K a month as well. I mean, I thought, man, if I could just make 10K a month or $120,000 a year, I will have made it. And ultimately, I went on to do that. It didn't, happen overnight. It took a while. But as I started to see that, I started to really ask myself, all right, what's the next level? And that would be make 250K a year. And I thought,
Mm,
wow, that's more than double. But if I start to add more value, I could go out there and do it. And what happened for me is I didn't do it. There was some invisible ceiling. There was something that was holding me back. There was something to say, perhaps you're not worthy of this. And that's when I think we've really got to think about that thing called
mm,
self wealth, self worth, and self esteem. Because if you don't think you're worthy of money, or you don't think you're worthy to go from this level to this level, you will start to sabotage it, or you will hit the ceiling, or you will plateau. And then you'll start to say things like, well, I guess it's not for me, or I guess I should just be happy with what I have. And that's not what high performers do. High performers start to do something we call measuring backwards. And they start to take a look at what allowed you to get up to 10K a month, or what allowed you to get up to 15K a month, or what allowed you to move forward. And it all comes back to you believing in who you are, what you want, why you want it, and then doing the right things in the right order at the right times for the right reasons in terms of contribution.
mm.
Because it's your contribution, it's your creativity, it's your ability to add value to someone or something where money becomes the byproduct of that value. And that's really when I started to add more value. And as I started to make 250 a year, I thought, well, if I keep doing this, could I make 500,000 a year? And I did. And after that, you start to say, how could I make 750 or how could I make a million? And it's consistent with high performers that once you make a million, and it is a hard slog to get there, the goal then becomes, all right, how do I make 2 million? And when you get to 2 million, high performers want to go to 5 million. And when you make 5 million, you start saying, well, gee, if I got to five, could I get to 10? And it goes on and on and on and on. So it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. If you want to see that real increase to that income, you've got to really ask yourself, how can I add more value?
That's beautiful. Yeah, because a lot of the reason why someone might, because I don't want anyone to misinterpret what you're saying here, is like you're not saying you're not worthy of money. Obviously, you're saying you're because someone who's worth, let's say, $10,000 a month, and I'm not saying worthy of, love or any of that stuff, but worthy of, which they are worthy of love. You're not speaking to that. You're saying believe you're worth it and then reverse engineer what someone of that worth would have to do in order to actually become worth someone who's, $10 million earner, $100 million earner, et cetera, et cetera. If that's what I'm understanding, do I have a good understanding of it?
It's even more than that because as
Okay.
high performers, I've never met a high performer that just had one source of income.
Mm,
High performers like to have what we call multiple sources of income. Maybe you've got a W-2 job, or maybe you're a professional, or maybe you own a business. But I find that people that I coach want to get into something more. Maybe it's real estate, maybe it's the stock market, maybe it's cryptocurrency. There's many different ways for you to put different fishing poles in the water and really move from what we call just labor-based income to asset-based income. And that requires a new level of thinking and a new level of behaving. And I think for anyone that's defiantly committed to getting in that direction or moving in that direction, that success leaves clues. That means instead of reinventing the wheel in real estate or in the stock market or in crypto, could you find somebody that's already become successful in it and start modeling what they are doing? Because if you start modeling what they're doing, that's going to produce a result. And if the result's good, you keep going. And if the result isn't good, you retool. But ultimately, you've got to have the vision, you got to hold the dream, and you got to believe that if they can do it, you can do it too.
beautiful. So you mentioned in the last interview that we had together that you talked about you mentioned golden handcuffs, and I'm wondering, how do you help someone recognize when they've accidentally built a prison instead of a business? Like, what are some of the warning signs along the way?
Again, for people that are wearing the golden handcuffs, you really have to stop and ask a better question. What's keeping me here? What's preventing me from doing something different? And it's usually that almighty paycheck, right? It's that consistent paycheck that comes in. It could be the health benefits, it could be the security, whatever it is. I believe that that puts people in a prison sometimes where they really doubt, could they go out on their own and do something different? Or could they start a side hustle? Or could they do something that really, starts moving them away from being in a corporation and more into the world of entrepreneurship? And at the end of the day, it's really, really a big leap for most people to leave the security of the paycheck, to think about, having the time to start a side hustle. But that's where a coach or a teacher or a mentor can really show you what other people have already done to break free of those golden handcuffs and move forward. And I'll give you a great example of that. I had a client who was an engineer, and ultimately he was working at one of the big engineering firms. And while he was in charge of one entire division and making, well into six figures a year, he was miserable. And we started to work together. And I said, what are you passionate about? What's on your heart? What would you do if you could do it? And he says, you know what? I love doing things, in the outdoors. He was big into camping, big into grilling, big into mountain biking with his wife and his two boys. And I said, would you ever consider starting a business in one of those industries? And he said, yeah, but I'm not sure what I would do. And so we put a bunch of options on the board. And he said, I don't like this. I don't like this, but I could see myself doing this. Well, fast forward to today, and he lives in Wisconsin, absolutely gem of a human being. He's built a $10 million side hustle in
Wow.
addition to literally traveling all over America, selling his beautiful products and making the world a better place. But I don't think he would have had the aha. I don't think he would have had the thought bubble to go out there and do it if we didn't start asking him, what was he passionate about? What was on his heart? And what would he love to move towards?
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a really cool story. I so I know you worked under Tony for 5 years, and you worked, fairly close with him, as I'm under the impression of. I
Mm.
wonder, what did you learn behind the curtain about Tony, or even about yourself working with Tony, that you couldn't have learned anywhere else?
I had the blessing to work with and for the man, the myth, the legend, Tony Robbins, for over half a decade and became one of his top master platinum coaches. And it was amazing because I got to peer behind the curtain and see, what drove this human being? What drove this individual? And Tony's, in his mid 60s now. He's been doing his work on this planet for well over 45 years. And if there's one thing that he really, really instilled in me, is that the secret to living is giving. That could be giving coaching, that could be giving wisdom, that could be giving knowledge, that could be asking empowering questions. But at the end of the day, we're all designed to help our fellow man and woman go further faster. And Tony has this insatiable appetite to end suffering, to help people get clarity, to help people see that their self worth, their self wealth, and their self esteem is worthy of amazing things. And so, as I started to learn the tools and the frameworks, and I started to bring in some of my own tools and my own frameworks and put them together, that's when my clients started to have tremendous transformation and tremendous breakthroughs in their career or in their finances or in their health, in their relationships, in setting up businesses, in buying real estate. And as a coach, there's no greater feeling than to see your client go out there and absolutely win the game of business and life.
Yeah, giving is such a difficult thing for people. I feel like a very small percentage of people truly understand what it means to give. And I mean, a lot of people's contribution comes from just raising their child. So that's one form of giving. But I guess
Yes.
how would you differentiate, I guess, that form of giving from what Tony's doing? Is it just like more expansive with Tony that he's like doing it for everyone, treat almost like treating his all people like his child or and I know I'm getting very esoteric with it there, but I'm wondering if you could like kind of differentiate the difference between like contribution and giving to your child, which a lot of people do, and like what Tony does and like maybe it's different energy behind that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, when we talk about the word contribution or what you give, you must start by giving to yourself and then your spouse or significant other, your children, your community, your siblings, your aging parents, whoever it is. But there's also a pull to go out there and do it for the community, to do it in business, to do it for your country, to do it for something that's even bigger than you and your children. So for the mom that stays home to raise a family, I mean, she's the unsung hero. God bless her because she does all of the invisible work in raising the children, getting the groceries in the house, doing the laundry, taking them to ballet or soccer. I mean, a mother works tirelessly to do that. And sometimes we have stay at home fathers that do that. On this side, men and women that go out into the world to operate a business or work for a corporation or start a side hustle or become a real estate investor, they're unsung heroes as well because business is not for the faint of heart. And ultimately, they have to go out there every single day. And when they come home, oftentimes they're tired. And as they really, have to transition from the work back to the family, we often talk about they've got to stop and, wash the blood and guts off their sword and shield that they've been out there battling with all day. And that's where a coach can really help you to get clear on there is no such thing as work life balance that's separate. It's all, in this fast paced world come together. And that's when we start to help you really with what are you focused on? Who are you showing up as? What are your standards? And that's really you raising the bar, whether you're at work or at home, and becoming the best version of yourself to do it all. Does that make sense?
100%. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering, was there a specific moment that you had with Tony, or maybe you're coaching someone with Tony that like something clicked within you and it just changed how you under what you understood about transformation and like how
Sure.
that experience might have changed how you coach people.
Yeah. What's fascinating about being in this body of work is you notice two things about people. There are people that want to change, and there are people that want to create what we call lasting change. And here's the difference. People that want to change will do these little bursts of inspiration. They might, change the way they eat. They might change the way they're dealing with their money. They might change the way they're showing up in the relationship, but it might only last a 2 or 3 days or a couple of weeks. Whereas people that create lasting change, they come up with a big, fat, compelling reason why they must change. They must be the ones that initiate the change, and they create the systems of support that will create that, opportunity to keep that going. So ultimately, at the end of the day, Tony Robbins was a master at not just getting people to change in the moment, but to see, hear, and feel and know that life could be much sweeter on this side as they work to create that lasting change. And the majority of it happens through really owning their state, their story, their standards, and executing on a great strategy.
I love that. You make things very easy to memorize when you speak, just so you know, it's very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you've mentioned you work with two billionaires. and Olympic athletes, without obviously naming names, what's something that surprised you about how they think that most people would never guess?
After working with some very successful people, millionaires, multimillionaires, even billionaires, it's amazing that they all have what we call the same human condition.
Hmm.
That is, billionaires still have doubts. They have fears. They have worries. Their anxieties, right, come up. But they also put their pants on one leg at a time, just like the rest of us. So at the end of the day, they're not superior to us. It's just that they've cultivated a different level of thinking and a different level of behaving where they're willing to go out there and perhaps, do something or take a risk or invest money where, most people that don't have money are fearing failure, where this guy's embrace it. They say, you know what, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to take intelligent and inspired action. And if it works out great, that's awesome. But if it doesn't work out great, I'll have learned something. I will have figured something out and we'll go back and go at it again. And take Elon Musk, for example. I mean, how many times has Elon Musk tried to put a rocket up into space and it blew up? Well, it happened once and he said, wow, that was $1 billion gone, but I'll do it again. And he went and did it again. And guess what happened to rocket number two? It blew up.
Hmm.
So he's scratching his head going, have we failed or have we got feedback? Well, we call it feedback. He went and built rocket three, then four, five. And I mean, now take a look at what Elon's doing in space. Take a look at what he's doing in robotics with Tesla, with Boring, with, AX, with AI and everything else in between. They're not afraid to fail. They really fail fast and then they go forward.
Totally understand. Yeah, it's a good delineate. I think sometimes we maybe paint these pictures of these people because they're ultra successful that, they've somehow totally overcame fear, or they just don't feel for fear, or they're sociopathic, which is just not true.
I'll
Um,
stack on that.
yeah.
What I find with successful people is they still feel the doubt, the fear, the worry, and the anxiety, but they take what I call a new position of authority over the fear, right? Because there's a little thing called the law of polarity. And you can't have fear without, I'll say this again. There's this little thing called the law of polarity, right? And the law of polarity says that you can't have one thing on this earth without the polar opposite being available. Just like you can't have day without night, you can't have black without white, or masculine energy without feminine energy, or the North Pole without the South Pole. So, what's that got to do with anything? Well, it means that when you have fear, you can't have the fear of failure or the fear of criticism or the fear of being unworthy without the polar opposite also being in play, right? And if we ask a better question, I mean, if I try to do something and I could fail, and you bring in the law of polarity, it means, well, if I try to do something, I could actually succeed, right? Or people might criticize me for doing this. Well, that's where they could also celebrate you and say, wow, look at you go. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. And that whole self-worth, self-wealth, and self-esteem thing where, man, if I fail, I'm a failure. I'm telling you, that's not what high performers think, because they also know that abundance is our birthright. And if we're going to move towards abundance, there are going to be times where we fall down, where it doesn't work out, where we got to get up, dust ourselves off, pick ourselves back up, and keep on keeping on. And that's where oftentimes the law of polarity will come into play. And I'll remind my client of what's on the other side when they take that new position of authority over it.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. I love the way you put that. I've never heard the law of polarity described, so I wish I had you as a. I remember learning about the law of polarity back in 2020, and it was a very confusing definition. You made it so clear. That's awesome. Um,
Thank you. It's true for
yeah,
everything. Tell me something on the planet that
there's
doesn't have a
nothing.
polar opposite. There is nothing,
There's
right?
nothing. Yeah,
That's it.
there's two sides to every coin.
That's
Um,
it.
so is there a difference between someone that you coach who's at 100K, let's say 100K a month, or not even 100, let's just say 100K. Yeah, let's say 1 million a month versus someone who's at 10 million versus someone who's at 100 million. Like, does that work change for you? Is it typically the same things? I'm curious.
When it comes to wealth, when it comes to how much people are earning per month or per quarter or per year, it really comes down to mindset, right? And thank God for me, I had a coach way back in the day, that said to me, Trevor, how much do you want to make a year? And I said, well, here's my number. And he said, well, is it possible that you could make that in 11 months? And I thought, well, there's 12 months in a year. If I can make it in 12 months, probably I could make it in 11. And he said, how about 10? How about 9? How about 8? How about 7? How about 6? And I started to think, well, it'd be pretty hard to make that much money in 6 months. And yet he called me out on it. He said that that has nothing to do, and that time has nothing to do with how much money you make, because
Mm.
money is really about adding value to someone or something. And as I said my number to him, he said to me, Trevor, I wouldn't even get out of bed for a month for what you want to earn in a year. And I thought, wow, that's really, really, really mean for him to say to me. But you know what? He was right. And it was an opportunity for me to rethink and retool. Is it possible that I could make a certain amount of money by collapsing time and remembering that time is really just a measurement or a metric, where the number of people that I touch or the number of people that I add value to are going to pay me, and that money comes back to me. And that's when things started to change for me. And I started to go out there and do things a little bit differently, where the avalanches of abundance came so fast for me in real estate or coaching or our 7-figure publishing company or some of our angel investing that we've done, that that's when I really started to understand that money has laws, and that if you understand the laws of money, which I teach to my clients, it's absolutely amazing to see how you use those laws to go out there and create a better life for yourself and for your family.
I love that. So you talk about in the previous call, you talked about psychology meets strategy. Can you explain what that means? Because most coaches seem to either focus on one or the other, and I'm wondering if you could do that, synergize both those things.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone can call himself a coach these days, right? They hang out their shingle, they're a coach, they're going to help you. And most people hire a coach for strategy. That is, they come to the coach and say, how do I make more money? How do I lose weight? How do I meet Mr. or Mrs. Right? How do I parent my children better? How can I really do this to get that? And that's where some of these coaches immediately fall into the trap of the how instead of the who. Because we got to back up the truck here. And before we go and execute on any strategy, we've got to really start to take a look at your beliefs, your values, your rules, what's important to you, what's a belief that doesn't serve you, what did your parents tell you, what did your school teachers tell you, what do we need to uninstall to create space for a new belief or new values or new rules. And then we move you to really checking in on your identity. I mean, are you a victim to what's going on in the world, or do you choose to transition out of that and be a victor on your way to victory, right? We also check in with your standards. I mean, are you willing to settle for an appetizer, or do you want the full meal? Because it's available to anyone who's defiantly committed to having it. So once we start checking in with the beliefs, the values, the rules, the identity, and the standards, then and only then can we transition to working on a strategy that can absolutely turn decades into days.
I love that. You even kind of combined the previous talking point that we just had with that. So it's really cool.
Yep, really good.
So if someone came to you and said, I know what to do. I just can't seem to do it consistently. Obviously dealing with procrastination. What would you tell them? What's actually going on there in the mind?
You know, when somebody comes to me and they say, I've tried everything, or I just can't do it, or it's not working out for me, it really comes down to focus, because where focus goes, energy flows. And I'll tell you that they're focused on all of the reasons why they can't do something rather than setting those down and looking at all the reasons why they can, right?
Hmm.
Because at the end of this day, there's something we teach called negative stacking, where this didn't work and this person didn't show up and this money didn't, bring the right partner in or didn't bring the right thing that I needed. And so as they do this negative stacking, it's almost like digging a hole, and taking them down, versus something we call positive stacking, where they take a look at what did work, what did you learn, and you start stacking it one on top of the other on top of the other to build a skyscraper of it. And once you start positive stacking and seeing it through a different lens, where I always say that every problem is a problem of perspective, you start to see new ways of thinking and behaving from that positive stack for you to keep going in that direction and focusing on what you want instead of what you don't want.
Love that. I remember a metaphor I learned, I think it was from Grant Cardone, talking about how if you focused on, and I remember doing this as a kid, you ride your bike, you just learned how to ride it. And if you just focus on not hitting the crack, like in between the sidewalk and the grass, you end up hitting the crack and then end up falling over.
Yep,
And
of
that's
course.
a yeah,
That's it.
classic lesson in that. Um, so you went from working for Tony Robbins to building Trevor McGregor International. What shifted in your own identity to make that leap? Because that's a big move.
It's a huge move. And I loved working with and for the man, the myth, the legend, Tony Robbins. But I got to that point where I was really talking the talk, but not walking the walk, right? I was helping all of these other business owners, franchise owners, real estate investors, doctors, attorneys, athletes step into their best and highest self to do their thing and go out there and create, a world of entrepreneurship and open companies and open businesses. But I was still handcuffed to working with and for Robbins. And that's when I really started to, think about what do I need to do to take care of Trevor so that I don't succumb to, becoming a lifer. Not that there's anything wrong with, having an employer who absolutely loves you and pours into you and teaches you and trains you. But I really wanted the freedom. I wanted the freedom to go out on my own. I wanted the freedom to travel. I wanted the freedom to work when I wanted to work, not when somebody told me to work. And that was really my launching point where I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it. But after the first 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I had built up a beautiful portfolio of clients who were also entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business owners, franchise owners, real estate investors. And that's when I really, really, really helped them and helped myself at the same time to understand that freedom was one of my highest values. And when freedom becomes one of your highest values and you get a taste of it, you start asking what else is possible. And as you ask a better question, you start to get better answers. You start to hang out with other like-minded people. I used to get into this place where I'd not only, continue to go to some of Tony's events, but I put on some of my own events. Those were meetup groups. Those were masterminds. Those were couples retreats. And it's amazing to see how much more fun we can have because, again, we're all meant to go big, right? And if you think back to even a couple 100 years ago, most people were entrepreneurial. They were farmers, they were butchers, they were bakers, they were blacksmiths that put shoes on horses. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that we all started working for someone else to help make them rich and successful. Well, I think we're returning back to that time now where we're returning to entrepreneurship, and there's going to be a whole new world of people working for themselves and having that freedom that's possible from here forward. What do you think of that?
I love that. Yeah, the thing that sticks out to me there is obviously at that time you had a lot of responsibilities on your plate, and I think sometimes fear can get in the way of people actually making that leap because there is all these what ifs. And I'm just curious, was there one thing that specifically stuck out to you during, if you could remember back to that time when you were,
Sure.
thinking you're going to make this leap? Because a lot of people, whether they're sitting at a job or it could be someone who has a really successful business, but they know in their heart of hearts they got to make a change,
Yeah,
and they just there's usually fear in the middle. And I'm curious,
of course.
yeah, what kind of shift did you go through, or to help someone along that path of fear when having to make a big change like that?
I love it. Again, when we're forced to make a big change because we're at the end of our rope or we can't go any further, it can be very scary to take the leap off of one cliff across the chasm to the other cliff. And for most people, the decision, unfortunately, is surrounded by money. It's like they've been working for this company or they've been getting this steady paycheck or this is the security or they've got the health benefits. So why would they leave that to jump across a cavern where they don't even know if they're going to land on the other side, right? And that's where, again, a coach can help you get crystal clear on what you don't want over here to create potential for what you do want over here. And what's fascinating about this topic is a lot of people want to make that leap to where, let's say they're making $100,000 or $200,000 over here. They immediately want to make that leap to where they're making that same amount of money on the other side. But that's not how it works out sometimes. Sometimes you got to make that leap and you might only, make 80 grand the first year or 85 grand the first year. And then in the second year, you're making 100 grand, which you made back here. But that's when the magic happens. And now you start to make 200 grand, 500 grand, a million over here. And if people just could understand that sometimes you got to go down a little bit to go up, that's when I think that breakthrough happens where they're ready to unlock those golden handcuffs and move forward.
So you and Lisa, last question I have for you, and we're
Yep.
right on time. That's good. You and
Beautiful.
Lisa
Nice work.
live what is called an endless summer, what you call an endless summer, between North America and Australia. Paint that picture for us. What is a typical week or even sequence of months? I'm not sure how you split it. Just like kind of walk me through like a year in the life or a few months in the life. Just curious what that looks like now compared to what it looked like, let's say 10, 15 years ago.
You bet. I've been on this beautiful planet for about half a century now. And I've had my, absolute share of failure and my absolute share of success. And it's been like a roller coaster for me. I'd make money, I'd lose money. I'd buy real estate that worked, it would implode. I, went into some angel investing in some startups where it looked good on the surface, but a couple of years later, it imploded. But you start to think differently. You start to learn, you start to grow, you start to behave, and you start to hire other coaches and mentors where you get around other people who've also been through the roller coaster, but they've also come out of it, at another level. And as you started to surround yourself with other people in masterminds or groups, or, you're traveling somewhere for a conference, you start to desire more of it. You want to travel more, you want to be around more like-minded people. And for my wife, Lisa and I, we got to that point where we said, what would life look like if we could literally create our lives to feel like we were living on vacation more often than not, right? Because most people might get their 2 weeks or 3 weeks a year, and the other 49 weeks they're working. And we thought, what if we could be different? What if we could do things, slightly different? And that's when we came up with the concept of living the endless summer. And it didn't happen overnight, but it really got to a point where we felt that we could live 6 months in North America a year and 6 months down under or in Australia. And that's what we've created. So it's really, when it's American summers, we're in America, or we go off to Europe and we'll be in Italy this year. And when it's the summer in Australia, we're down under. So it's not that we're afraid of snow or cold weather. In fact, we love to ski and we love winter sports. But really, when you're in the sun and you're out doing things in nature, there's nothing that feels better than going out there and living the endless summer and having this lifestyle. It's incredible.
I actually have one more question on top of that because I'm wondering what kind of impact that living in endless summer has on your business and any of your clients' businesses who have actually implemented that in their own personal lives as well.
Well, for some people, it might sound crazy. It might sound like a tall order where they're used to doing staycations, right? Instead of vacations. Or they say, well, Trevor, I've got a brick and mortar business. I can't just, up and leave like you have. And that's where I'll challenge them to say, all right, even if you don't get up and leave, could you, travel to Europe for, let's say, 4 weeks this summer? What are all the reasons you're telling me why you can't? And once those are on the table, we'll start to take a look at all the reasons that you can. I'll give you an example of that. I work with this amazing doctor and cardiologist in Virginia, and he's married. He's got two beautiful kids. And he always said, Trevor, you don't understand. I have to be at the hospital or I got to be here to work on my real estate portfolio. And I said, well, what if you created a new belief? What if you created systems that support, you having boots on the ground, or you trading with other doctors, or you doing different locums, or you doing, other things that allowed you a new way of thinking and behaving. And he didn't believe it, didn't believe it, didn't believe it until I said, I challenge you to do it. Well, fast forward last summer, not only did he take his wife and his two boys to Italy for an entire month, right? And they did amazing things like traveling around to Rome and Venice and Florence, but they also got to do some really cool things like learn how to do glass blowing, make Parmesan cheese, and some of those fun things in the old country, to where this summer they're scheduled to go for 8 weeks. So again, sometimes you've got to believe it to see it. And once you believe it and see it, you can rinse and repeat it to make it happen. but it also is something that has inspired other doctors to get up there and figure out a way to do it as well. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really awesome. There's a lot of the, a lot of times it kind of goes in hand with, um, what you teach about how basically there's like I think I would, in my mind is how I categorize it. And I know I'm not putting this in your language, but you have the hard skills. It's like, this is what I need to do in business in order to succeed, yada, 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 yada. And I would call that the logical, the monkey brain, maybe. I don't know. It does you well. But then you talk about the thing that really takes people to the next level, which is their heart and the energy that comes from that, operating from a different frequency, having a bigger contribution, a bigger why. And it's kind of the same thing with the personal side as well, how you're talking about the endless summer. And I just wonder how much of an impact that actually has on people's families, even after because I'm just imagining a guy you just told me who, and this isn't a question, by the way, that, so
Yeah.
just, yeah,
I'll
just,
stack on it though. I'll
yeah,
stack on
sure.
it. You might get a good soundbite out of this one. I find that people live in three different modalities of time, right? We've got the past, we've got the present, and we've got the future. But because they spend more time focusing on the past and what they've done or not done for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they still make decisions based on their past, they're really missing out on stepping into the present to create what I call the predictable future, right? And the predictable future is really when you come from a place of possibility, you come from a place of courage, you come from a place of optimism. And I'm not talking Pollyanna, right? But real, if I really want to live my best life and really help my family live their best life, what's really possible? And it's really where they get to reinvent who they are, what they are really believing life is about. Because where most people, work and they're exhausted and they're time starved and, they need a vacation from their vacation, they're so tired. High performers do it a little bit different. And that's when you start to plan differently, you start to see things differently, and you start to do things differently because you're not just interested, but you're committed to living in that predictable future and making it a reality.
Beautiful. All right, man. Well, I'll go ahead and end the interview. Thank
Awesome.
you
Thank
for
you very
thank
much.
you for
Great
being
questions,
here.
by the way. Thank
Thank you.
you. You did a great job. I
Really.
hope you're able
Thank
to
you.
get some good juju out of that. And yeah, that's my passion. I mean, I'll say this, maybe we'll wrap up with this because I find there's two types of people on this planet. There's people that are interested and there's people that are committed, right? And the ones that are interested will do what's convenient, where the ones that are committed, they'll do whatever it takes. And people often say to me, Trevor, what do I do to be committed? And I said, there's two things you got to do. Number one, you got to reignite your hunger. I mean, how bad do you want the next level of your career or your finances or your health or your relationships or travel, right? How bad do you want it? Are you willing to settle for the appetizer or do you want the full meal deal? Because both are available to you. And the second thing is passion. It's passion because where there's passion, there's possibility. And where there's passion and possibility, there's also profit. So at the end of the day, ignite that hunger, ignite that passion, and you can go out there and live your best life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think of myself when I was a kid. I had such a I mean, even now, man, like have such a hunger, and it's funny where that comes from, and people have to find that after maybe a lot of failure, and I definitely had to find that after a lot of failure. I
Yep,
know that's typical, but yeah, that's a good soundbite. I
that's
like that.
great.
Maybe I'm coming up with more questions as we spoke. I don't want to like exhaust everything in one session here, but I
Yeah,
do want to ask you about heartbreak and the
sure.
because everyone at any level deals with heartbreak. Because if you really, the dark side of passion is heartbreak. If you really care about something and you're not, it's like if you really care about something and you want it to succeed and then it doesn't work out, it's like that can oftentimes. I'm gonna save this for next one, so don't answer it now. I'm gonna make sure I note it down, but or maybe you can if you feel so
No, I'm going to
inspired to.
answer
But
it. I'm going
okay,
to
yeah. So
answer it.
how does one after having heartbreak when they really are passionate about something, they have heartbreak and they just can't seem to bring that passion back because of that heartbreak they had. How do you help someone to overcome that?
Well, it's such a great question. And ultimately, there are times where we go out there and we give it our all. And, it's the blood, the sweat, the tears, the money, the effort, the sleepless nights, all of that stuff. And for whatever reason, what we want doesn't work out and we feel crushed, right? It could be in business, it could be in a relationship, it could be anything where I'm telling you that God doesn't waste the pain. I'll say it again. God doesn't waste the pain. You were meant to go through something because, business or life is a vehicle for growth. And it's really the universe's way of saying you're meant to learn something. You're meant to grow. You're meant to really understand that if you want to have a life that's a beautiful garden, there are going to be weeds in your garden. And you can't just be, angry that there's weeds. You got to go pluck the weeds out and tend to the garden. And that's when we talk about, the spirit of the mind and that we're a resilient species. So instead of, feeling the crush and the disappointment and the discouragement and all of that, and don't make that wrong because that's, meant to serve us. It's also about, okay, what is the universe or what is God wanting me to do to move forward? Right? What am I meant to learn? What am I meant to do to springboard forward? What am I meant to do to reinvest in the way I think and the way I behave so that I can start moving forward towards something that the universe wants us to do? And I
Mm,
found that for myself and for a lot of clients, it's when we get crystal clear that we weren't meant to go down that path, or we weren't meant to go down that business route, or we weren't meant to be with that individual, that the universe doesn't say this is the end, but that it's a new beginning. And it starts to open up new doors for business, and it starts to open up new ways for money to flow to you. And it starts to open up new ways for even relationships. So at the end of the day, I think that getting down and angry and frustrated about it, we're human. That's going to happen.
yeah,
But I also believe that God doesn't waste the pain and that the best is yet to come.
absolutely. That's great.